I think for scholars both in India and in Europe, I think we need to map the the trajectory from irreverence to offense. There is a culture of irreverence, and the culture of irreverence emerges from a skepticism, emerges from play, emerges from a little bit of mischief. And gradually, as that develops, we find groups responding to that culture. Some accept it, some enjoy it, some are offended by it. So I think it's important as a first exercise for both societies which are in transformation, which are learning to live with diversity and pluralism, to map these different forms: irreverence, iconoclasm, and then offense. I think once you map that, you begin to understand what are the elements of irreverence and iconoclasm which produce offense. Now, the production of this offense has two sides. It can emerge from the content of that which is said. It can emerge from say a film or a cartoon or a painting, and it can emerge from the perception of a group. So it's both content and perception, and very often the perception is produced by political groups. So the politics enters in the production of perception. And the production of that perception often produces an experience of, or an expression of offense. The offense may not be intended. The offense, it may be a very creative act. So in India, for example, we have one of our great innovative artists who died some years ago at the age of 95, who was hailed as India's Picasso. And his work, which some read as a great retelling of India's epics, was considered as offense. And I mean, years after the paintings were made, not at the time the painting was made, but decades later. So I think offense is there is an element in terms of content, but a lot of it is in terms of the production of offense through politics. Yeah, I think that question of why does it happen years later is an important question if you want to understand the trajectory of democratic politics in plural societies. As groups acquire voice, and as this voice begins to find a place in the public sphere, those who represent that voice, the political class, begins to grandstand, because they want to consolidate their support group. So they begin to take positions which can be extremist, which are taken in a competitive environment. So the competition between groups, the competition in response, the claims in response to the state results in grandstanding, and sometimes in terms of ethnic outbidding, which is an extreme form of grandstanding, saying that unless you do this, we are going to create a law and order problem. Now, this is an expansion of democracy. In a paradoxical sense, as democracy expands and gives voice to groups that did not have voice, and as this voice enters the public sphere, one of the forms in which it takes is that of ethnic outbidding. And the state has to respond. So it may be something like recently we had a case of a cartoon which was produced 60 years ago. 60 years ago, it was in the newspapers. There was no protest. The subject of that cartoon was still alive. 60 years later, as his support group grew in social strength, they found the cartoon offensive and they demanded that it be withdrawn. I think the state must recognize that people may be genuinely offended. I think the state must recognize that there are no absolute protections to freedom of expression. I mean, I find it very interesting that those who, say, work in the British royal household cannot talk about what's happened in the royal household. If they have written books, they get prosecuted. So their books are suppressed. And the argument used is not freedom of expression, but contract. So a different argument is used to suppress an expression. I think the state must recognize that we must create constitutional mechanisms on the one side, so procedures to deal with claims of offense, and we must create a constitutional culture where people begin to realize that there are differences, that what I consider to be offensive somebody may consider to be playful. Somebody may consider to be a great work of art. And works of art have always been the subject of determining the borders. I mean, the classic case in the British courts was D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. It was considered offensive, but it became a classic case to determine what is nudity and what is nakedness. Interesting distinctions. Constitutional procedures produce interesting distinctions, and those interesting distinctions become the elements of the boundaries that we will create. What is permitted and what is not. And this keeps shifting over time. As public culture changes, the boundary changes. The boundary is not fixed for all time. But the constitutional procedures determines where the boundary should be. It cannot be determined on the street, which is what is happening in many instances. It cannot be determined by grandstanding in Parliament. Even Parliament cannot determine it. Parliament must allow its voice to be expressed and then hand it over to a constitutional machinery. Whether that is the normal courts, whether it is a specially constituted body, these let legal experts discuss. But it must follow the process of constitutional adjudication. I think that is the question.